Good morning, everybody. So we are here live in Facebook for our first talk of the year. And yes, I've just been preparing what we're going to go through today.
Talk of the year. I've just been
dealing with my technical stuff as well. I was trying to find a way where I can see you all in Facebook as well as on my Zoom call, but we seem to be doubling up. So let's do this here. So pricing. This feels like a good time of year to be addressing this issue. I know January for a lot of people in self-assessment is a time where you're doing your end of year accounts. And so hopefully you will have some figures and some understanding of where you're at the moment. And reviewing our prices, I think, is something that we should be in the habit of doing at least once a year. Doesn't mean that you actually have to change them all the time, but certainly checking in and doing a review and making sure that things are working for you. Now, before we really dive into some of the technical process of how we might go about that, I think it's really important to address what I think is a little bit the elephant in the room here. And that is, I feel the yoga industry as a whole has a bit of a problem with our money mindset. I think there's a lot of judgment around money. There's a sense that it's not spiritual, that it's unethical, it's dirty, it's bad, like there's something wrong with money. And so it makes us really uncomfortable when we're looking into this area of our teaching business, because on some level we might be feeling this is a bit icky, or am I being a bad person to even be thinking about this? And so I wanted to kind of address that first, because I think if that is underpinning all your decisions around pricing, you're never going to get to a level that really works for you. So we need to be really comfortable with what we're charging. And yeah, I have a few affirmations that can be useful, but I think it's really important to reinforce to ourselves that we are trained professionals. You know, if you're in this group as a teacher, you have already paid and studied and you are qualified as a professional. And it is not unreasonable to expect a living wage from that. You know, we're not talking about being greedy and money grubbing and hoarding wealth. We need to create a sustainable business because we're in the business of helping people, and we can't help people if we're not in a good position ourselves. And so creating sufficient wealth, prosperity for ourselves so that we are well resourced, so that our nervous system is balanced, so that we're not working to burn out. If you're scraping by making ends meet, it's stressful and that's depleting. And if you're running from class to class and you're being underpaid all the time, it's soul destroying and it takes the joy out of teaching. So really, to be the kind of teacher that I think we all want to be, we need to be reasonably well resourced. And there's a difference between having enough to be comfortable and being really greedy and focused and trying to, like I say, to hoard and squeeze as much out of everyone as possible. That's not what we're talking about. So it's trying to have a healthy relationship within yourself with what money means to you, so that when you go through this process and come to a price, that you feel comfortable and at ease with that, and not apologetic Because I think when people approach us and say something like, oh, what do you charge for a one-to-one? If our response is, well, I charge this amount, the energy there is that you don't think you're worth that much. Um, it just needs to be really calm, and this is what it is. And that might not be affordable for everybody, but that doesn't necessarily matter. And we'll come into affordability a little bit later. But just being really comfortable with earning a living wage. You deserve a reasonable living wage. You wouldn't expect anybody else to work less than minimum wage. So don't expect yourself to do that. And as I say, we need to be earning well enough to keep our teaching going. I so often see posts from teachers who are giving up teaching because it doesn't sustain them. And then there's all those students who are not being helped by that teacher because they're no longer teaching. Or if we're really stressed and exhausted and approaching burnout, well, then, our standard of teaching is not going to be our best either. So it is not unethical to earn a decent living wage. That's all we're talking about. And there's also nothing wrong with developing a business that ends up super successful and you're more wealthy than you ever imagined. Because actually, money's just an energy, really. It's a medium in which we operate in life now. And if you end up with a lot of it, then you're in a great position to do more good with it. Just because people earn a high income doesn't mean they're bad people. Maybe then it gives them, the opportunity and the ability to redistribute that wealth. And to be honest, I think as female entrepreneurs, we're much more likely to redistribute any extra wealth that we get into good causes that make a difference in society. So really, there's almost a moral duty to earn well, because then you can help more people. You help more students by keeping your teaching as a sustainable practice. And then if you have extra, then you've got extra that you can, give to charitable causes. You can use to, make a difference to people's lives around you, maybe helping friends and family. Like, there's so much potential there. So don't feel bad about earning. Okay, so that was one of the things that I really wanted to lay down as a foundation, first of all. And I would suggest maybe developing your own affirmation around this. So a very snappy one that I learned from Denise Duffield Thomas is I serve, I deserve. I serve my community, I give to people, I do good in the world, I deserve something in exchange. So that might be something that works for you. You may work out something that just really resonates for you, but just remember, we are offering genuine life-changing value in the world through the yoga that we teach. It's really worth something, and you are worth something. Okay, so hopefully some of that will sink in. I really like using affirmations because it's a little daily practice. So I'd suggest create one that resonates for you and just use that every day, and we'll start to, as we know, with regular practice, whether that's a meditation or a mantra, whatever it is that we do, we start to shift things on a deeper level. Okay. So thinking about the practical thing, how do we decide what we're going to charge? So I'm not going to be here telling you exact figures, because this is something that you need to work out for yourself. All our circumstances are different in terms of where we are in the world, what our expenses are, what our communities are like. But there are some ways of starting to get a ballpark figure that will work for you. So rather than starting from the point of, oh, what do I think people would pay for a class? I think that's very unhelpful, because there are lots of reasons why people choose to spend their money on what they spend on, and what they value and what they don't. And I think if we start from a place of trying to please other people, you're you're on the back foot, really, because you're never going to please everybody. So what we need to do is set it in a way that works for us, and then people who resonate with that will come to us. And there's enough variety in the world, and we can talk about that within your own teaching as well. We can offer different levels so that something is affordable for nearly everybody. So I rather start from the position of, well, what do we need to make this sustainable? So the first task, and you might want to watch this back with a pen and paper and a calculator. So I think a big mistake a lot of self-employed people in general make is they think about their working hours as the hours they spend with their clients, their students. And so some people might say, oh, but, I'm only teaching a couple of classes a week, so therefore I'm only working 2 to 3 hours a week. That is not true. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is take note of all the hours that you work on your business. So you might have more than one thing going on. So for this process, work out all the hours that you spend on your teaching. And there are way more hours outside of the classroom than inside usually. So you need to include, all your admin time, even things like renewing your membership and your insurance, researching, health conditions maybe for somebody in your class, or maybe even just researching what's the best website provider. If you imagine this was a job that you were employing somebody else to do, like if you were employing somebody to teach a class and that's what you're paying them for, and then you just gave them all these extra hours, oh, by the way, can you do all this extra admin and business work? They quite rightly would say, sure, but I need to be paid for those hours. And we forget to pay ourselves for those hours, and this needs to be factored into our pricing. So that's your first thing. I think work out all the hours you spend, creating posts for social media, interacting with students, doing your accounts, anything that's business related that you wouldn't be doing if it wasn't for the fact that you're a yoga teacher running these classes. Those count, and really you should be paid for that time. So once you've got, say, an average over a week, and things may vary, you might want to average it over a month, but have an idea of all your hours, outside of the classroom and inside of the classroom. And I would also include your travel time, because, if you're anything like me, you might be in 3 or 4 different places in a day. You might be teaching in one place, then you're going to do, say, a private house call, and then you might have another one, and then you might be doing, say, a Zoom lesson at home. All of that, again, if you were asking somebody else to do that, you would probably feel like you would want to compensate them for their time. So we need to treat ourselves with the same kind of care as well. Okay, so once you've worked out all your hours, and if you average it out, say, as a weekly thing, it will give you a sense of, how much of a full-time job this is. So we're not just counting the hours that you do classes. And I know a lot of teachers might have an additional profession that they're doing as well. But if you're working out that, say, you're spending 18 hours a week, you know, towards your yoga teaching business, well, then that's kind of half of a full-time job. So really, you want to be looking at generating that kind of salary, which brings me to the next point. And I know this is a tricky one, but I think sometimes it's helpful to think about, as an annual salary, what would be a reasonable level of pay for somebody of your training, experience, expertise, for what you're offering? Again, there's a huge variety within the yoga teaching profession. And sometimes as a guide, you know, I find it useful to look up, well, you know, what would an NHS physiotherapist be paid, you know, for my years of experience in my local area? You know, I think that's not a million miles away from what we do, and just to have a sense of, you know, what would be a reasonable salary. You know, or if you were in a position of great wealth and you were hiring somebody, what would you think would be a reasonable salary to pay somebody for all the work that you do? And then when you've got a figure that you feel comfortable with, and you know, this might be a process you go through a few times to start feeling comfortable, you can then pro rata that by your hours. So if it turns out that you are doing effectively a full-time job, well, then that's a salary you want to aim for. It might be that you're doing the equivalent of 2 or 3 days a week. You can prorata it, and it gives you an idea of what you would want as a annual turnover in your business. But your salary is not the only thing. So this is another kind of area that I think sometimes people don't always factor in when they're trying to work out what they should be charging for classes. So the next thing that you want to add, and hopefully you will have some of these figures at this time of year, is over a year, what are your expenses? So I know a lot of teachers will think about, well, the room hire is this and there's travel, so therefore I'm going to price according to that. And that's kind of halfway there, because there's a lot of other expenses we have that are not directly connected to studio hire. So we would have things like, you know, your membership and your insurance. It might be your Zoom account. You might be paying for online booking system. You might be using a card payment kind, you know, or online payment system, and they're going to take a percentage. You know, there's lots of other expenses, things like, you know, for me, there's the software subscriptions that I use. There's a video editing one. I've got Microsoft Office. Like, there's all these things that we can kind of forget about, but they are business expenses that you need to do your business. So you need to get an annual total for that. And then you add that to the figure you came to for your salary. And then you're starting to get a ballpark figure of ideally what you would like to be generating for your business in a year, you know, and then we can start to break that down monthly and weekly and start looking at, okay, how am I going to be generating that kind of income? So it may be that you have a combination of group classes and one-to-ones. Looking at a group class, obviously a key thing to look at is what is your capacity. So if you're in a studio, there will be a limit to how many mats you can fit. Excuse me, I'm going to turn the phone off. Never rings except in times like this. So Yes, so you want to have a look at the capacity for each class that you have. And so that's going to determine a little bit, when you're looking at what you need to be earning in a week, you could start to get an idea of, well, each class really needs to generate a certain amount of income. So that will help you set your prices. And I really recommend to all teachers to offer one-to-one classes, because they can be a really good way of generating some secure regular income at a higher level. Because when we're teaching a group class, you might not get the guaranteed numbers, but if you're on a one-to-one, then that's a guaranteed amount, because that person has agreed for that particular session. So hopefully that process is going to help you start to come at figures that are going to work for you. And I would err towards always advertising at your top rates. So if you work out an amount, then maybe add 10%. And then that's your advertised rate for a class or for a private one-to-one. And then you have a little bit of wiggle room to be able to, maybe offer deals. You might have a drop-in rate for a class, and then you have a rate for a term. But you always want to make sure that your lowest rate that you offer is going to be sufficient to give you the income that you need. So if you start from a place of what's the bare minimum I need, and that's the price that you set, if you then offer a discount, you're going to be working at a loss, or you're going to be working at a level that won't sustain you and pay your bills. So always start a bit higher. It's much easier to discount than to put prices up generally. But you want to set things at a level that's comfortable for you. And then you're in a position that if there is one person who's really struggling, you can quite comfortably offer them a discount, because the rates that you charge are keeping you in a zone of comfort, that you have a little bit of wiggle room. And this kind of comes on to the last point about affordability. So again, it kind of goes back to that whole money mindset at the beginning, where people feel like they have this obligation to make yoga really affordable to people. And I do absolutely understand that. We also need to have our business sustain us so that we can afford to live as well. So what I often recommend to people is to have a range of offerings at different levels of affordability, so that you always have something to offer somebody. And I think it doesn't hurt to have a small amount of offering that is free. So you might, and you could use those offerings also to enhance your marketing. So you might have, say, one video of a class. That could be a really lovely way for somebody to get to know your teaching style and see if you're somebody that they would want to work with. But then for people who say, oh, I can't afford to come to yoga, and you say, well, okay, well, here's a class that I've made. You can access that for free and just replay that and use that. When circumstances change, you can come join my group class. We're not morally obliged to work for free. Like, no other professions are expected to do that, to make things affordable for people who want it. And what I found in my experience is, and this may be controversial, but very often when people are asking for discounts or saying they can't afford, often what's going on for them is they haven't quite understood the value of what we're offering, and therefore they don't want to pay that much. And I've had cases in the past where people have worked with me and they have said, oh, look, I'm really struggling. I can't afford your prices, but I really need some yoga. And I've worked out a price for them. And then as weeks go by, you start hearing conversations, or, we're talking to each other and they're talking about their life, and they're paying for things that would more than cover a yoga class. They're talking about their social life, or going out for meals, or having facials, or getting their hair done. And there's nothing wrong with any of those, but they prioritize that in their spending. So they're telling me they can't afford, but really in quite a lot of cases it can be that somebody is just choosing to prioritize something else in their life. And I've been amazed sometimes at people who have found a way to afford the things that they really, really value. And so they'll say, oh, do you know what? I don't need a takeaway curry every week. And maybe it's not the best for my health. And for the cost of that, I can pay for a yoga class, more than. So, often there are ways. Equally, there are people genuinely who are really struggling, especially at the moment. So, again, this is where, if we are well paid with people who can afford it, there's a bit of wriggle room to maybe support people who are struggling, or maybe we can run a community class somewhere. If there's something that we can offer at a really low rate for a certain part of the community that are really struggling, and maybe there's some funding involved in that, or maybe a community centre could offer us the venue for free, so we're not out of pocket, and they can do lots of marketing, so we're not spending lots of time. Maybe they even could pay for some mats, so that it's not costing us a lot in expenses and in our time. And then we can offer a class that's super affordable for a cohort of people. It might be a community centre in a council estate where people are all on benefits, and then you can be charging a low rate, and that's your community work that's really affordable for those people. And then other things you do is paid at a proper rate. So we need to look at those things that we offer. And then having a scale. So like I say, it might be that we have a community class. It might be that you're doing something in a studio at a day and time that's, it's not really accessible for people in full-time work. But you might have a lower rate, say, on a Wednesday afternoon or something. A lot of yoga studios might run community classes that are a little bit more affordable. So there are ways. But again, I would move away from the idea that you ever have to work for free, or you ever have to work below a level that's going to sustain you. And then you can have your general classes, which again are still very affordable when you compare it to a one-to-one. And so what we're increasing is the amount of value that we're giving somebody, and the price goes up accordingly. So working one-to-one, bespoke lessons just for those persons' needs, maybe with some flexibility around time or location. You might be going to their house. It's, so all the attention, the time, the expertise, the convenience, that comes at a premium. So your one-to-ones need to reflect that. And then as a sort of an even higher end offering, I know lots of teachers like to do weekend retreats or yoga holidays or those kinds of things. So they can be a bit more of a premium offering that's going to be, probably a few £100 depending on duration and location and those sorts of things, so that we're offering something for everybody. So when people come and say, oh, well, I can't afford this, then we can always say, well, look, if you can't afford to come to this class, you might like the community class. And then if they say, I can't come to the community class because I'm working, I've got a full-time job, then I might question a little bit. You know, or you could say, well, look, I've got a free video that you're welcome to, and you know, that's giving them something. It's helping them with their yoga practice, but we're offering something for everybody. And this is also where, and I think particularly in a cancer setting as well, is find out what's available in your area. So it may be, and it may be something that you're offering yourself as well, that if there is a charity or part of the health service that is offering yoga classes that are free to people to attend, then that's a great thing that you can offer. So I've had that before. So I teach at Maggie's. They pay me. People who come to the class come for free. And so I've had people contact me privately and say, oh, I would really love to work with you. And then if they can't afford the one-to-one lessons that I offer, I say, oh, that's absolutely fine. Like, why don't you come along to my Maggie's class? It's free. So you need to approach the charity and they will process that and make sure you're eligible. But there's a free class you can go to. Or if you want to have some one-to-one work with me, I'm really happy to do that. And these are my prices. So, you know, there's always something that we can offer people. So in that way, we can avoid the pressure to keep cutting our prices to try and be inclusive to everybody. If we structure the business overall, that we have different things that are available at different levels, but all of those things recompense us for our time and our energy, then that's something then that's going to sustain us. And then we're making offerings that are going to be suitable for lots of people. You know, and if people really don't like our prices, they are not forced to pay them. You know, they can look for alternatives. But I think we have to hold our nerve as an industry overall. And I say not to be unreasonable, exorbitant, but we are trained professionals. And I will keep saying that to really embed that. And what we do needs to be valued a bit more maybe than it is socially at the moment. I think there's a little bit of a race to the bottom with pricing, with gyms. But also what I hear from that is students going are not always getting the best service because, you know, the teacher is being, you know, asked to teach massive groups of people where they can't give individual attention so much. Maybe the environment isn't so great in a gym. You know, there's lots of reasons why people might start to feel like, actually, I need something a bit different from my yoga class than rock bottom prices at a very noisy gym. And if we set our prices in a way that really work for us, we also don't necessarily need to be having hundreds and hundreds of students every week. You know, we want to get a core of students who really value what we do and who value investing in themselves and in their own well-being. You know, when they have really connected with that value that yoga brings to their life and they have a commitment to it, then these are the wonderful students that we can work with over a long period of time. And it's that win-win situation. You know, they are getting the benefit of a really good teacher, maybe in a slightly smaller class with lots of attention, a teacher who really gets to know them and can really adapt for them. You know, there's so much benefit from working in person with a teacher who really cares about you. And we need to, again, value what we're giving to people and how valuable it is to them. So I hope that's given you lots to think about. Definitely you may want to replay parts of this, say with your calculator and a pen and paper, and start working things out. And do feel free to write some comments below this video. And if you have some questions, or if there were any little aha moments that was a nice penny drop for you, or something that might shift your approach in this, that would be lovely to hear about that too. So I will wish you well for the rest of the week, and we'll see you here same time next week, Tuesday at 10, for our next talk. So have a lovely rest of your day.